Welcome to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today my guest is Dr. Ellen Stofan. I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today, Ellen.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here, Janet.
Ellen joins us for a conversation from California.
Yes, I'm in Pasadena, California for the end of the NASA Cassini spacecraft mission.
I wanted to touch on that. But before we go there, I was curious to know if you were able to get a good view or a partial view of the eclipse last month from your position.
I did. I actually went down. We have a beach house in North Carolina, and my youngest daughter and I went down, and it was only about 98% there. I just couldn't get my life organized to actually make it to the zone of totality, which I was disappointed that I didn't. But I tell you, I thought the 98% was awfully cool.
Yeah, we had about 82% in Northern Virginia, close to the capitals. I thought it would get darker. I don't know what I was thinking, but
I've actually been in a total eclipse before, and it didn't get as dark for that as I thought it would. I thought it would get black as night, and it did. It got very dim, but it didn't get as dark as I thought.
Dr. Stofan, Ellen, earned your Bachelor's of Science in Geology from the College of William and Mary. What would lead somebody into geology?
Well, I was that kid that was picking up every rock and shell on the beach. And when I was I was always interested in the outdoors. I loved the mountains. I loved the seashore. And then when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my mom was getting her master's degree in education. She was a school teacher. She taught science. And she was getting her master's degree, and she had to take a science class for that, and she took geology. And she asked the professor if she could bring me on the field trip. Mm-hmm. So we were, walking down this stream bed somewhere in Ohio with these rock walls on either side of us. And the professor was describing how that area had formed tens to hundreds of millions before. And the fact that you could read a landscape and know its history by looking at the rocks, I just fell in love. And so at a very young age, I decided to become a geologist.
It's
fascinating, especially when you realize this place I'm in hasn't always looked like this. There's this whole history of being underwater, being in a desert, being in a totally different climate, and this huge, long history of billions of years of the Earth's surface. Things have changed and changed and changed, and the rocks tell that story. And so to me, the fact you could, I'm going to go figure that out.
Now, I know that at the College of William and Mary, they have a strong study abroad emphasis. I'm wondering if when you were there, you were able to do anything outside of the classroom that involved geology. Well,
I predated the emphasis on study abroad, I'm afraid. But when I was there was a big emphasis on doing field work. So we actually would go down to the eastern shore of Virginia. We went out down to Nag's Head, out to the Outer Banks to look at shoreline processes. We went up into the Appalachian Mountains to look at the processes that form those mountains. And then one summer, which is fairly typical for geologists, we went to what's called field camp, and we went out to Utah and Colorado, where you scramble up and down mountains all day and map, and it's hard work, and it's hot, and it's dusty, and you're in a tent half the time, but you come away thinking, wow, that was the best experience of my life. So outdoors a lot, hiking around a lot, loved it.
And then you went on to your graduate studies, and you received a doctorate in geological sciences from Brown University in Rhode Island. Is there anything you'd like to share about that research?
Yeah, it was really fun. When I went up to Brown, I actually had intended to work on Mars, because I had done a summer internship out at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. And at that point, I was working on some Mars data, and I thought, that's what I want to do. And so I went up to Brown. And my advisor, a guy named Jim Head, had just gotten involved in a deep relationship with an institute in the then Soviet Union. And that institute was part of a spacecraft that was about to get to Venus. And so when the data started coming back, and this was the time when the Soviet Union and the U.S. were really not getting along at all, but the two space agencies wanted to talk to each other. So they were actually doing it through meetings that were hosted by this institute from the Soviet Union and Brown. But the long and short of it was I got access to a lot of the Soviet data of Venus, which is a planet that had been very poorly studied. I got to write my thesis, my PhD thesis, on a type of feature that no one had ever seen really on a planetary surface before. So I ended up really kind of being at the right place at the right time.
What was that feature, just out of curiosity?
They're very large. They're called corona because they look almost like crowns on a surface. Mm-hmm. They're hundreds of miles across, and they have rings of ridges surrounding them. And we think they're formed by basically hot material coming up from the inside of a planet and pushing the surface up, causing some volcanic eruptions. They're a little bit like how Hawaii formed, but a little bit different.
Just for scale, how long did that data, or I guess it was telemetry, to come back from Venus?
The trip time between Earth and Venus is only it's less than an hour, so the data comes back fairly rapidly. What takes a long time is because this was radar data, because Venus is covered in clouds, and you have to use a radar instrument because radar wavelengths can see through clouds, and you can get an image of the surface. What took so long was all the computer processing time to actually process the little ones and zeros coming back from the spacecraft into actual data that you could work with. And so that was actually the real step, was what happened once it got here on Earth, because computers were just not as powerful. We just got some radar data back from our Cassini spacecraft the other night, the last radar data, and that data we can actually process, within hours. So it's much more rapid now to get hold of the data.
Now, the Cassini mission is coming to an end after 20 years of travel. Did you see that start off?
I actually was not there yet when it started off. That's how old this mission is. So the mission actually started in 1988, and I didn't get to JPL until 89, so I was still in graduate school. So I was actually this is a bizarre thought given that I'm 56 years old. I was too young to propose to be on the mission, because you have to be out of graduate school to propose to be on planetary missions, and I was still in graduate school. So that's how long this mission has been. And the other day at our last team meeting, they were showing films from the first meeting, and it was it was pretty funny. And I can tell you there were 3 women in a room of about 100 people. So that was also an interesting thing, because now over half the room is full of women. So some things have changed.
Some of my conversations with scientists and engineers have been towards that point of how do we bring more women into the STEM fields and keep them going through industry and academia.
Yeah. No, one of the fun things about Cassini is the science teams, because the mission did start so long ago, most of the instrument teams, except for one, were led by men. But over the years, they have been very welcoming to sort of the next generation, and then amazingly enough, the next generation of scientists. And all of a sudden, you see women, white women, you see people of color, and so you really see this change it literally in the complexion of the mission, the makeup, the gender of the mission. And it's been really nice, but it's been partially because they did have this very open and welcoming, we need everybody here to do the work kind of attitude, which has been great.
So from Brown, you went across the country, as you mentioned, to NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. How did you find that transition was it fairly seamless?
It was fairly seamless, because at this point, I'd been working on that Soviet data of Venus, and in the meantime, the U.S. had a probe on it called Magellan on its way to Venus. And so I got to California, I think about 5 months before the probe arrived at Venus. So I got there, basically, set myself up, and our spacecraft arrived at Venus, and we started taking data. And so here I was, for the second time now, walking into a situation where all of a sudden I've got reams of data to look at, a really fun team, people I'd already been working with to work with. And so it was pretty seamless. It was really fun, and the team was a great team, and the spacecraft performed really well. We got excellent data. And Venus is a fascinating place, because Venus is basically the Earth gone wrong. It's the same size as the Earth. It's made of the same stuff. And it's 900 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. It has a runaway greenhouse atmosphere. And so a lot of it is trying to figure out, how do you get an Earth-like planet? And Venus has a lot to tell us about that.
Is Venus also a cautionary tale of where we can go as Earth?
Yes.
It is.
Back in the early 90s when I was working on the Magellan mission, I would give a lot of public talks. And at that point, the climate models were kind of all over the place. There were indications that the scientific community was getting increasingly concerned about climate change. But we weren't at the point where we were at the consensus that we have now. And I would give talks to audiences saying, we're not sure, but is this something we really want to gamble with? Do we really want to make our atmosphere so full of CO2 that we can't grow crops to feed the world? We cause sea level to rise. Is this where we want to head? And unfortunately, we all know the situation that we're in today, where climate change is continuing. We see the effects of it. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening right now, and we continue to be unwilling to make the hard decisions to do something about it. With some exceptions, there are some great things going on out there.
If you had a magic wand, what do you think needs to happen, Gore, in this year? And I guess it must be a whole platoon of things that have to go forward.
It is. But, one of the chief things is we need to make a real commitment to decarbonize our economy. And so, what that means is basically getting off of our addiction for fossil fuels. And again, there are good aspects to that because it's, getting rid of dependence on foreign oil. It makes the country more secure. We're well on our way to things like electric cars. Alternative energy is really coming up. I think solar power, the solar industry employed more people last year than the coal and gas and oil industry. So, there are really positive signs. And, part of that is we need to refurbish our buildings to not waste heat, not waste electricity. There's a way out of this. There is a clear path. We just have to commit to it. And, I know people are concerned about the cost of it, but the cost of doing nothing, as we see from Irma and Harvey, is gigantic. And for people who, for example, live in Miami Beach, people who live in the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area of Virginia, where roads now flood regularly at high tide, we're already spending a lot of money on climate change, and those numbers are just going to continue to rise. So let's spend the money invested in jobs, improve our economy, and fight climate change at the same time.
Now, just to play devil's advocate, some people say, well, this is just climate change is a long average of things, and this is just a little tiny blip. It's kind of like the stock market. We're just looking at it very close in, and this is just a rise. So, it's a temporary, transitional, heating up and active. So what do you say to these folks?
Yeah, it is really hard, and I think people are confused. And part of it is I think the press confused people for a really long time because whenever they wanted to write a story about climate change, they'd find one scientist who supported it and one scientist who didn't, despite the fact that 97% of climate scientists understand that climate change is happening. And what they don't understand is, again, the history. The science community started talking about the role of greenhouse gases in warming atmosphere in the late 1800s. People started worrying about fossil fuels and climate for well over 50 years. There was a huge amount of research put in. There's a huge body of scientific literature on this. We've looked at all other variations, differences in the sun, volcanic eruptions, natural cycles in the Earth's climate due to our rotation around the sun, everything. We've analyzed all those factors. Human-induced climate change is different. It has a very clear signal. And again, we see the effects of it. The Arctic sea ice is disappearing. The permafrost is melting. The sea levels are rising. You can see a very apparent change in the climate, the temperatures around the world every year. So there's really no debate at all in the scientific community. The only debate is really being fueled by fossil fuel companies that don't want to change their ways. But again, there's ways to get out of this without ruining our economy. And people who say otherwise are just not thinking right.
That's encouraging, but takes some real effort to move forward. So until recently, you were the chief scientist at NASA, and we are touching on the challenging times. So I guess a popular question is, how can we continue to strengthen the efforts in bedrock science and fundamental exploration? So basically, this is a question about why should we continue doing this? I'm being very devil's advocate today.
No, it's good. It's good. Because I do think, when I go out and talk to audiences, I talk to people about these amazingly beautiful images from Saturn and how important it is to study the Earth and how by studying other planets we learn about our own. And amazingly enough, we're actually now really close to finding out if there's life beyond Earth in our solar system, in our universe. And then I say, if all of that, you're just like, okay, I don't care about it. Okay, that's fine. If all of that really you don't think that's worth the effort, let me tell you that for every dollar we invest in NASA, it returns multiple dollars to the U.S. economy, especially where we invest in life sciences, when we invest in technology. Because we actually don't launch money into space. We support aerospace industry in the U.S. We support thousands of small businesses around this country. And when you invest in science and technology, you invest in the future. You create new technologies, new ideas, and it really is this fundamental investment in the U.S. economy by research and development in science and technology. And there's reams of data on this that show that the more a country invests in technology, in science, the better their economy is, because that's where innovation, that's where the economic engine really comes from.
You've moved on just recently from NASA to...
Yeah, so I left NASA at the end of December, and so I've been doing some writing. I'm been doing a lot of speaking, consulting part-time with the Applied Physics Lab of Johns Hopkins University, which does a lot of planetary exploration. And I've been working a little bit with some colleagues on looking at some of the cuts to climate science in the budget and what the implications of some of those cuts could be. So sort of a lot of miscellaneous but fun activities, and trying to take a lot of the summer off and spend it with my 21-year-old daughter who was home from university for the summer.
Is she in science? I'm just curious.
I have 3 kids, and none of them are scientists, and they all joke it's because I gave them one too many lectures at roadside outcrops while they were growing up. So we lived in London for 5 years, and all of them really got the international bug. And my son was in the Peace Corps. My daughter works in the Senate, and my youngest is majoring in Russian at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So they all have some sort of international bent in what they've gotten interested in, which is great. They're all great kids, even though they're not scientists. Yeah, my dad was an engineer, so my dad and I are, always moaning that of his 5 grandchildren, none of them have gone into science. But what can you do?
Just kind of leads into this. What is your best advice or encouragement for young persons contemplating a future in pursuing science and or technology?
A couple things. The one thing I always say is don't get discouraged. When you're in a room and you look around that room and no one in the room looks like you, it's easy to start thinking you don't belong there. So, as a woman in this field, and I'd love to say it's changed. Actually, this Cassini meeting I've been at this week has been like 30 to 40% women, really unusual, really encouraging. But in general, when I would be at meetings at NASA, I would look around a room of 30, 40 people, and there'd be, maybe one African-American person, and maybe 3 or 4, white or women of color. And so, you just think, do I belong here? Because no one here looks like me. And I always say, have confidence, sit at the table, really think about what you're going to say, offer solutions, don't just point out problems. And really feel like you can contribute. You kind of have to fake it. To me, I didn't have a lot of self-confidence, and so I had to figure out, okay, how do I fake this? It's an acting job to some extent when you don't have self-confidence. And the other thing I would say is, I do have 3 kids, and my kids were born scattered throughout my career, and I frequently spent a lot of time beating myself up over, I'm trying to balance being a wife, a mom, a scientist, and I'm not doing a good job at any of them. And, my kids turned out fine. My husband and I are still happily married. And I always tell people, just go easy on yourself. You can be your own worst critic and just take a deep breath, and it's going to be okay.
This coming week, you'll make your way over to the East Coast, and I believe you're moderating a discussion downtown for William & Mary, the Washington Women's leadership panel. Is there a particular reason why you back this, or what do you foresee?
Well, I think it's going to be a really, really fun panel. For one thing, as you had mentioned, I went to William & Mary. That's where I met my husband. 2 of our kids have gone to William & Mary, and so I really love the college. It's an amazing place. We've spent a lot of time involved with the college since we left because I'm a huge fan of liberal arts education. I'm a huge fan of what that college accomplishes. And to me, one of the most exciting things is in this coming year, William & Mary is celebrating a couple of major events. They're celebrating 50 years of the first African-American resident student, and they're celebrating 100 years of women at the college. And so women started at William & Mary in 1918, and I have to tell you, this wasn't out of their really thinking about how to be fair to women and how to bring up women. It was the time of the First World War, and men, their enrollment had dropped radically because of the war, and they were thinking about having to close their doors. And so in desperation, they thought, okay, we'll let women in. So that's how women started at William & Mary. But nevertheless, we're celebrating 100 years. I will remark for people who don't realize and who are from Virginia, the University of Virginia didn't let women in until I think sometime in the 1970s.
That's right.
So William & Mary really did lead in Virginia in terms of coeducation. So it's a really exciting year. And one of the things we were really thinking about is how do we highlight some of the amazing women who've graduated from William & Mary. And a lot of William & Mary students, because of the proximity to Washington and because of sort of the overall character of the school of service, how do I pay it back? How do I go out into the world and do something useful? William & Mary has a huge number of kids who go into the Peace Corps, huge number who go into public service. And so this panel is really highlighting some of the women of many. We had so many we could choose from who've chosen to go into government service and have reached, pretty significant positions. And so we thought, what a great opportunity to celebrate this 100 years of William, start off as we're going to be celebrating over the next couple of years, this 100 years of women at William & Mary, but not just celebrating the past, saying, look at these women that have come out in more recent years, look at what they're accomplishing. And then, of course, taking that opportunity to say, what's it been like being in a male-dominated environment, either at the State Department, for me at NASA, across the federal government? What's your experience? How have you succeeded? And so I think it's going to be a really fun panel. These women are all amazing.
I think that one message that I've gotten speaking to different folks is that young women need to see it in order to be it. So I think that hearing folks on this podcast and just having the panel discussions and the internships and opportunities like that really fire the imagination. So I want to thank you for that.
I think that's really true. I think for a lot of people, again, especially when you think, everyone in that field of technology, everybody in that field of engineering is a white man, so how do I fit in? And to show people, look, there are people of all color, there are women, we need everybody to participate to be successful because the best minds are all over the place. And so let's get that diversity of experience, that diversity of people, so that we can always form the best teams. And I think getting out there, I've considered it very important throughout my career to get into classrooms, get out there talking to kids to say, hey, this is what a scientist looks like. You may think it's a guy in a white coat with crazy hair, but it's also me.
That is exactly what the other white coat, crazy hair. That is a quote from a different speaker here, from a different podcast guest. That is funny that stereotype is so strong.
I went into a classroom not that long ago. It was a kindergarten classroom, and they were putting up all kinds of different things on a bulletin board to show what different careers in science could be, rocks and the universe and biomedical and computers and everything. And to stick every picture up, they were using a little crazy guy with white hair, like paper doll. And I just looked at it, and I was horrified because, again, what are you telling those kids? Here are all these careers, but, oh, by the way, this is what people who do them look like.
So let's see, the Cassini mission is coming to an end. Is there anything that you are keeping an eye on in space?
Well, it's funny because I was saying to someone the other day, this is when Cassini, the mission ends in the early hours of tomorrow morning. This will be the first time since I was in my 20s that I haven't been on a NASA mission. So it's very disconcerting. On the other hand, I'm on a few proposals that are sitting on NASA's desk right now, so we'll see what happens. To me, it's really important about getting back to these places, because when you get data from a spacecraft, whether it's trying to understand why Venus went down this opposite path from the Earth, how we can use one of Saturn's moons called Titan, where it actually rains and there are seas of liquid hydrocarbon, how can we use these places to better understand Earth? And so when you send a spacecraft, you get all this data back, it tends to give you more questions. So you say, oh, that's not what I expected. Now I need to go make some more measurements to actually understand how can I use this place to help us understand our own home better. And so to me, while it's really sad to say goodbye to the Saturn system with Cassini, we've learned an incredible amount, and we've also formulated a lot of really specific questions that now we want to go back and answer, including, is there life on some of these moons of Saturn?
You may not make it in my lifetime, but perhaps.
No, I am really optimistic. In fact, I went out on a limb about a couple of years ago, somewhat controversially, and said, I think we'll get strong indications of life within a decade and positive indications within the next 20 years. And I strongly believe that there's so many candidates we have, from Mars to one of the moons of Jupiter to these moons of Saturn. It's not going to be the exciting life that people want. It's going to be microbes. But it's still going to really be an amazing moment when we get that confirmation that, yes, life did start somewhere else.
It's a philosophical change when those things happen throughout history, our long history. Well, I don't know if it's so long in astronomical terms. That's about all the time we have for now. Thank you once again for your insights and conversation, Ellen.
Sure. I'm really happy to talk to you.
Thank you all for listening. Today, my guest, once again, has been Dr. Ellen Stofan, and I'm Janet Lee. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.